in South Korea to create a sour crude benchmark. When a refiner in South Korea buys a cargo of Iraqi Basra Light, the price they pay is referenced to a benchmark.
We're 15 years later and we're in the same place. We don't make any of these minerals that we had thought were critical or deemed critical or hope to have happen.
여러분, 예전엔 우리가 원자재나 기름을 구할 때 강대국들이 정해준 가격을 그대로 받아들이는 게 당연했습니다. 그게 세계 시장의 룰이었으니까요. 우리가 생각한 것보다 한국의 위치가 꽤 커졌다는 게 느껴지는 대목인데요. 미국이 어떤 고민을 하고 있고 그 과정에서 대한민국이 어떻게 거론되는지 지금부터 확인해 보겠습니다.
In 2025, China imposed stringent export controls on critical minerals and rare earths, focusing the world's attention on the fragility of supply chains for critical inputs and sparking discussion in the United States and around the world on building alternative supply. China is the world's largest buyer of numerous commodities, from crude oil to soybeans. It dominates processing and refining in many industries, producing inputs for its industrial sector. As we've seen over and over, access to factors of production is a national security issue, and that often runs through commodities markets. In many markets, Chinese firms are the primary purchaser of goods, and Chinese processors are the primary manufacturer. China has also demonstrated its capacity and will to cut off supply and require onerous disclosures. Taken together, these dynamics have the potential to present significant future risk to global commodities markets, safety, and soundness. Prices in physical markets are influenced by supply and demand, but the financial markets for these commodities runs deeper than the physical markets. Benchmark prices are set on the New York Mercantile Exchange, CME, or the London Metals Exchange, in addition to numerous other regional exchanges around the world. Traders on these exchanges are not just physical buyers and sellers hedging price exposure. They are international investment banks, hedge funds, individual investors, and large commodities traders, which with benchmarks set in the US dollar on international exchanges under the purview of US, UK, or European regulators, China has been at a major disadvantage when it comes to pricing power for agricultural goods, base and precious metals, and energy products. China recognizes this weakness and has made enhancing its pricing power an explicit goal in developing domestic exchange.
중국이 가공과 정제 능력을 앞세워 가격 결정권까지 가지려는 상황. 미국 입장에서는 충분히 불안할 만한 일입니다. 그런데 여기서 흥미로운 장면이 나옵니다. 세계 원유 거래가 실제로 어떻게 돌아가는지 설명하는 과정에서 대한민국 정유사가 대표 사례로 등장합니다.
Hi. Thank you for the opportunity to testify today. My name is Michelle Brohard. I serve as the head of policy and geopolitical risk at Kepler, where we provide commodity intelligence through satellite monitoring of storage facilities, vessel tracking across global shipping lanes, and data analysis of physical commodity flows. Before I joined Kepler, I spent 25 years trading commodities on Wall Street. That combination, a career of a trading desk and daily visibility into the physical market, is the lens through which I wrote my brief before the committee today, and is the lens for which I offer my testimony. This panel is inquiring about China's efforts to promote benchmark alternatives. What began as a domestic hedging mechanism and a way for Chinese state-owned enterprises and refiners to manage commodity price exposure in their own currency has evolved into something with broader implications. Beijing built a market structure that now gives countries a functional pathway to conduct commodity trade outside the dollar system. And some are using that pathway to circumvent sanctions. But I want to be clear about something that often gets lost in the conversation. China's commodity exchange has serious structural problems that stand between where it is today and any credible claim to benchmark status. First, let me start with what a benchmark actually does, because I think it gets lost in the geopolitical discussions. Benchmarks organize markets. They determine how prices are calculated, how risks are hedged, and which currencies and which financial infrastructure sit at the center of global transactions. When a refiner in South Korea buys a cargo of Iraqi Basra Light, the price they pay is referenced to a benchmark. When a trading house in Singapore hedges that cargo, they hedge it on an exchange. For the last 50 years, those benchmarks have been Western exchanges dominated in dollars and clearing through U.S. financial infrastructure. In 2016, China's state-run Economic Daily wrote that developing domestic commodity future market was essential in giving China more influence over how commodity prices are discovered and referenced globally. Now commodity prices are ultimately set in supply and demand, and which should be controlled by a market. But who runs the exchange and whose currency contracts are settled and through whose financial infrastructure traders are cleared is determined by whoever builds and operates the market infrastructure. The Shanghai International Energy Exchange, or the INE, was established in March of 2018. When it launched, many Western traders, including myself, expected it to be dominated by retail speculation, prone to volatility, and unlikely to gain serious international traction.
방금 들으셨나요? 세계 시장의 기준이 되는 가격 체계가 얼마나 중요한지, 그리고 중국이 왜 이걸 탐내는지 잘 보여줍니다. 하지만 중국이 마음 먹는다고 다 될까요? 천만의 말씀입니다. 기준 가격이라는 건 결국 신뢰의 문제거든요.
China's influence over globally recognized benchmark prices remains limited. While Chinese futures contracts are widely used domestically and are becoming more relevant regionally and in specific sectors, they have not achieved the levels of international adoption necessary to rival established benchmarks yet. The key constraints include restrictions on capital flows, continued regulatory intervention, limitations on participation in these markets, and broader concerns about transparency and governance. These constraints reflect a deeper tension in China's approach. Efforts to internationalize its markets are pursued alongside a continued commitment to maintaining state control over financial activity. This model has proven effective in supporting domestic stability and industrial development. However, it also limits the extent to which Chinese markets can serve as globally trusted mechanisms for price discovery. Benchmark status ultimately depends on sustained participation by a wide range of global actors, including commodity trading firms, financial institutions, and non-financial companies that hedge their physical risk in these markets, as well as confidence that prices are formed in a transparent and rule-based environment. Looking ahead, a likely outcome of China's quest for pricing power is not a replacement of existing global benchmarks, but rather the emergence of a more fragmented pricing system. In such a system, Chinese benchmarks will play a growing role alongside established ones, particularly in sectors where China holds a dominant position in physical supply chains, such as metals and critical minerals. In other sectors, like global oil markets, existing benchmarks are likely to remain dominant. This implies a future in which pricing power is more distributed and increasingly contested across regions and commodity sectors. Maintaining US leadership therefore requires first reinforcing the foundations of the existing system. This means sustaining the credibility, openness, and liquidity of US financial markets, which remain the cornerstone of global commodity pricing. Ensuring that producers, traders, and financial actors continue to rely on US benchmarks should be a key priority.
국가가 모든 걸 쥐고 흔드는 중국 방식으로는 도달하기 어려운 영역이 바로 이 투명성입니다. 시장이 믿어주질 않으니 한계가 올 수밖에 없죠. 자, 그렇다면 미국은 이 상황을 어떻게 풀어나가려 할까요? 여기서 한국의 이름이 다시 나옵니다.
I agree with Johannes, and one of the things we've seen is, in China's financial markets in general, Chinese foreign banks are vanishingly small as a portion of China's markets. And one of the reasons for that is that they've done the opposite of what you just described, where they say you have to have local capital. We're not going to count your international capital against the lending that you can do in China, and that has restrained the ability of international banks to compete. But in this case, they want the opposite. Instead of restraining the ability of international banks to compete in their jurisdiction, they're trying to pull them in. And recognizing kind of what I was saying at the very beginning about of my testimony about the fact that getting your hold of all this renminbi creates a lot of frictions right now. One way to get around that is exactly what you described.
That's very helpful. I was just trying to think of something clever to say to follow on Commissioner Miller's comment about money balls, but I don't have anything on that front. Is there a coherent allied strategy that we can think about here on commodity market architecture, or are we letting this one sort of go by default? I'm just thinking, the Australians use Chinese benchmarks on iron ore. We're seeing the Middle East start using Chinese benchmarks on oil. You sort of just talked about some of the things that other international banks are doing. Is there any way we sort of find a way with either the Europeans, the Indians, the Japanese, the Koreans to sort of think about an allied strategy here, or is that sort of wishful thinking?
유럽, 인도, 일본, 그리고 대한민국까지 미국 위원이 이 나라들과 함께 원자재 가격 전략을 짤 수 있을지 묻습니다. 시장을 실제로 움직일 수 있는 파트너가 필요하다는 뜻이겠죠. 특히 원유 시장의 빈틈을 파고든 중국을 견제하려면 새로운 대안이 절실합니다.
And the fundamental challenge here, as I'm sure you know, is that China wants to have all the positives of these markets with none of the volatility and the negative side. And that means that you don't actually get many of the positive elements of having true market pricing because, on the way up in 2015, for example, they love that the equity markets are rocketing up. And then when they start to go down and you find that, margins are getting unwound and it threatens potentially the financial stability, then they call in the national team and put a floor on the prices, which means that you don't properly price anything anymore. You don't properly price the downside risk. And I see this across markets for interest rates, for credit. They want the market, but they don't really want the full package, and that's not really how it works. So then you muddle through and get something that doesn't really function as efficiently as it should.
Thank you. So let me flip the first question over and talk about it from the other direction. The renminbi is soft pegged to the U.S. dollar. So there's a lot of concern on this side of the Pacific, certainly, about commodities pricing being done more in yuan than in dollars. But what are the actual implications of that if the currency is soft pegged to the dollar anyway?
So I think the most important implication is, as Martin already mentioned, that it does give Beijing the ability to evade sanctions potentially. And for kind of Chinese consumers, or kind of commodity trading companies, etc., or buyers of commodities, this might, there wouldn't be an FX transaction risk. They would kind of maybe, I think it's between 1% and 3% cost saving that they could have by using RMB contracts instead of dollar contracts, because they wouldn't have to do any hedging and so on. So that is probably the two most important aspects of it, I would say.
Yeah, I think the other element is that, even though it is soft pegged, as you say, the renminbi does move against the dollar in potentially significant ways. That then changes. And in the last, if I recall correctly, in the last when the dollar depreciated, they kind of let the renminbi appreciate. So that then leans against some of the other pressures. So they do get some autonomy from U.S. Financial conditions because of the fact that the renminbi is sort of guided up and down. It's not really a free market, definitely, but it is not fully coupled to the U.S. dollar.
Thank you both.
Have we seen efforts to manipulate either spot prices through commodity trading or supply constraints, either actual supply constraints or fabricated supply constraints?
I'd say less on the constraint side, but certainly if you think of most mineral markets have, we'll say in the 2020s have the same pattern. They may run up a little bit and then you have just a kind of a crash or oversupply, bringing the price down. Think of nickel, think of polysilicon. And my general understanding in the Chinese market, right, there are incentives to, say, open mines, find production. In this case, in nickel case, it's Indonesia. Say polysilicon, it would be in the Xinjiang region. And that overcapacity, of course, eventually crashes the price, and they say, oh man, that wasn't good. What can we do about that? And of course, generally nothing. I guess the other example would be what happened with cobalt, and then the Democratic Republic of Congo trying to limit cobalt concentrate exports. But the pattern seems to always be the same. And I don't, I sort of like this story that in a lot of ways, the goal isn't to sort of like get control and then run up the price. The goal is sort of to just get control and basically keep it, right? Keep selling the rest of the world these export products. So I'm less concerned about a scenario where the Chinese government says, okay, you guys, you're now hooked on cobalt, and now we're going to take it away, so the price skyrockets. I don't know, maybe that general idea is like they're not profit maximizers. You might think that they're output through maximizers, if I can use, again, like academic terms, like their objective isn't profit maximization, it's more output maximization. And so I haven't seen any evidence that, they're, okay, now we're going to, jump up the price or artificially restrict supply.
Okay. Thank you. Anyone else?
Yeah, I just want to jump in really quickly. I think that markets like cobalt or lithium are easy to manipulate because the liquidity is very thin, but commodities like oil have become much more difficult to manipulate. I mean, we see manipulation perhaps in like shipping, which is also easy to manipulate because there's not a lot of liquidity there, or there's not a lot of supply and demand. So I just want to also mention that the difference in the liquidity will depend on the difference in the manipulation.
Great, thank you. Thank you.
One, it would be probably disincentive, but it would also require transparency in the Chinese market, because once you need those disclosures, then you need to have more transparency in the Chinese market. And it's kind of an opaque market when it comes to all of the other markets. Like the US is by far the most transparent market, right? We publish every piece of data that there is, whereas China doesn't publish hardly anything. And if they do publish it, it's really hard to quantify whether or not it's true or not. So it would open up transparency, and it would make for a more transparent market, and transparent markets bring more efficiency in markets, which typically bring lower prices. So that's one thing. I think that the number one thing that would really help, though, when I mentioned this earlier, and I think I've mentioned it also in my written testimony, which is China, when they stepped in and started the INE with their crude oil benchmark, it filled a gap that was existing in the marketplace, which was a sour crude benchmark. And I think that it would be hard to move away from that, because there is no sour crude benchmark. So what happens is if you trade a sour crude, it trades as a differential to the light sweet crude. So it trades as plus or minus, normally minus, one of the light sweet crudes. So if it's WTI minus $5 is how you get the Mars price, for example, the US Mars price, right? So there's no real sour crude benchmark, but all of Asia uses sour crudes. So if you're doing business in Asia, you really do need a sour crude benchmark. So I don't think it would disincentivize them from not being on there, but it would require China to bring transparency to it. I guess what I'm saying is that benchmark is needed. One of my other recommendations is get one of the other, like Japan, South Korea, Australia, to create a sour crude benchmark so that there is more transparency in the market. And there is another place where these producers that transact in sour crude and have consumers in sour crude are able to have a benchmark for that at a different exchange.
Okay. Thank you.
그 대안 중 하나로 제시된 것이 바로 대한민국이나 일본, 호주 같은 나라가 아시아의 새로운 원유 기준 가격을 만드는 겁니다. 자원 하나 없는 나라가 묵묵히 쌓아온 정제 능력과 시장 경험이 있었기에 나올 수 있는 제안입니다. 우리가 기준을 따라가는 게 아니라 직접 기준을 만드는 역할이 가능하다는 말입니다.
Members of the Commission, thank you for the opportunity to testify today on China's ambitions on commodity market derivatives and the future of exchanges for critical global commodity markets. My name is Ian Lang. I am a professor of economics and business at the Colorado School of Mines, where I'm also the Viola Vester Coulter Chair of Mineral Economics. Colorado School of Mines is the world's leading university on minerals and mining engineering, and we are very proud to be the only U.S. institution that has a mineral economics program. Relevant to today's hearing, I have served as senior economist for energy on the Council of Economic Advisors in both Republican and Democratic administrations. I recently chaired a Commodity Futures Trading Commission subcommittee on critical mineral and derivative markets, and I'm currently involved in the Department of Energy's Critical Materials Innovation Hub. The testimony today reflects my personal view and focuses on how China's dominance in the midstream and processing sector and its growing influence over pricing and settlement mechanisms interact with the small, volatile, and rapidly evolving critical mineral markets, a dynamic central to the U.S. supply chain resilience and national security. To that point, more specifically, most of the minerals that are traded on exchanges have a diverse set of companies and countries that are producing and refining that mineral. Sort of by definition, they're large markets. So think of things like copper, aluminum, iron ore, and precious metals, gold and silver. For the minerals that are commonly found on critical mineral lists, they are orders of magnitude smaller in market size. Again, think something like hundreds of millions of dollars in market size, with a very concentrated supply chain. And obviously those conditions, extremely small market, sort of opaque, concentrated supply chain, are not something that lend themselves well to the conditions that facilitate the benefits from exchange trading. Think of things like price discovery, investment facilitation, and risk management. Numerous reports have shown that the United States mines, meaning pulls out of the ground, a large amount of many of the critical minerals that we are interested in. However, they're never separated from the overburden or dirt that occurs when you're, say, trying to move zinc to a zinc smelter. Yeah, I mean, I guess for most people would claim that this concern with critical minerals started around 2011 when China restricted some exports of rare earth into Japan, and the prices went up about 10,000% or something like that. And since then, it had been sort of a policy to say, hey, like, here's some money, go look at some of that dirt, or here's some money, build a refinery. And at least from where I sit, it's sort of like we're 15 years later and we're in the same place. We don't make any of these minerals that we had thought were critical or deemed critical or hope to have happen.
그런데 정작 미국은 어떤 상황일까요? 겉으로는 강대국이지만 속내를 보면 참 답답한 상태입니다. 돈을 쏟아붓고 정책을 폈는데도 정작 필요한 정제 시설 하나 제대로 못 만들고 있습니다.
And so, I mean, sort of thinking of something like, saying a contract for difference would probably be like, okay, we understand that the Department of War will need X tons of tungsten, auction off, okay, for $10, who can give us that? For $12, who can give us that? And then what you're sort of doing is allowing firms to reveal their cost structure, reveal how much it's costing them to make it, and it sort of lets there be like an anchor customer. Because generally, if you're going to start making a lot of these products, it's, you have a mine that you want to run all the time. You don't want to sort of stop and start the mine. You have a smelter, again, you want to run all the time. You don't want to stop and start it. So in order to meet a certain, we'll say, quantity, again, you're probably going to build capacity that is not exactly equal to whatever, say, your contract is. And then you open up the possibility that other people could be there to say, oh yeah, I'd also buy that, right? Like, hey, if you were making some and you're here, I might buy that. Maybe another way to think of it is like a bit of a chicken and egg problem. Like nobody's out there saying I want it, so no one's saying I'll build it, and no one's out there saying I'll build it, so no one's saying I want it. And we need a way to sort of break that, not through, again, characterize.
땅 파서 광물을 캐내는 건 쉽지만 그걸 쓸모있게 정제하는 기술은 하루아침에 뚝딱 만들어지는 게 아니거든요. 사람 머리 쓰고 땅 흘린 경험이 수십 년은 쌓여야 하는 영역입니다. 미국이 15년 동안 해냈지만 결국 못 해낸 일을 우리는 이미 해내고 있는 셈입니다.
More dirt or helping somebody say, lay concrete and start to make a building, because essentially if they start along the capital subsidy line and you start building a building, say a refinery or a smelter, and in the meantime, nobody wants the product, right? You're like, why am I hurrying, right? I'll just stay, I'll stop, I'll wait until somebody's, looking for this thing. So I feel like if you can get some demand locked in, it starts to be a ball rolling downhill. So I don't know if that's clarifying, or maybe all my euphemisms made it worse.
No, I think it did work. Thank you.
오늘 미국 청문회 영상을 보며 시청자 여러분들은 어떤 생각이 드셨나요? 강대국들이 중국의 가격 결정권을 걱정하고 정제 시설이 부족해 고민하는 모습이 조금은 낯설게 느껴지셨을 겁니다. 예전에 우리는 그저 시키는 대로 정해진 가격대로 움직이던 나라였습니다. 하지만 이제는 미국 의원이 함께 전략을 짤 수 있을지 묻고 전문가가 우리의 역량을 대안으로 제시하는 시대가 됐습니다. 자원 하나 없이 오직 사람의 머리와 성실함으로 이뤄낸 이 제조 능력. 이것이야말로 대한민국의 진짜 저력 아닐까요? 오늘 영상을 보며 시청자 여러분들은 어떤 생각이 드셨나요? 오늘 영상은 여기까지입니다. 시청해주셔서 감사합니다.